So then, moving right along into the next chapter in Grammatology, this is chapter 2 of the second section. It's called That Dangerous Supplement. And in this chapter, Derrida will then go on to analyze one of his central ideas, the concept of the supplement that he has gotten here from Rousseau. And the supplement becomes writing. Basically, Rousseau will associate writing with the supplement. Writing will be seen as something that is supplemental to speech in the sense that it's merely added on to it. And speech is a manifestation of the metaphysics of presence, and it isn't in any need of improvement by writing. And then so as Derrida starts off the chapter, he makes a distinction between the supplement in two different senses. The supplement in the sense of adding on to something, as in the sense that writing merely is an add-on, but it also threatens the integrity of speech, or the supplement in the sense of replacing something, the supplement as a substitute for something. And in this second sense, the supplement as a substitute, this will become the basis for Derrida's theory of the supplement as différence, as the endless substitution of chains of signifiers for one another. And he starts off by saying here that Rousseau talks about the supplement. Every time he talks about it, it's always in a negative context. He says that, for example, a wet nurse is a supplement for a mother, and the wet nurse can never be as good as the original thing that the mother was. So she is seen as something secondary, as a mere supplement, just as from the point of view of education as a supplement to maternal love, it's a poor substitute for maternal love. Also, he will say that mining and metallurgy is a substitute for agriculture. Agriculture is the part of the metaphysics of the bounty of the earth and its self-presence, but men do not see this. They are blind to it, and they go looking out of their greed for precious gems and metals and jewels and so forth, and they dig into the earth, and this leads them, mining becomes a supplement that substitutes for nature's bounty, and it does no good. And so he sees culture itself as something that is a supplement to nature that has a corrupting influence, or that has the capacity to have a corrupting influence. Likewise, he talks about how masturbation, Rousseau in his Confessions discovered masturbation, and masturbation is a supplement for the sex act, but it's something that is negative, something that conjures forth fantasies and images of non-existent beings in a kind of a faux presence, so that the supplement is not, it has no real presence to it, and it's associated with the realm of images, and it can lead one astray and corrupt one's basic essential nature. And so Rousseau portrays masturbation in this negative way. But notice that this idea of masturbation as fantasization links the supplement with the realm of the image, which in the Platonic tradition is seen as a secondary thing to the realm of the logos, the eidos, the forms. Basically, Plato says that writing has the same ontological status as the works of art of the artist. Writing is a representation of a representation. It represents speech. Speech in turn represents thought. Thought is a copy of the eidos, the forms. And correct utterance, that which transforms doxa as mere opinion into logos as discourse, is modeled on a theory of truth that matches the initial Platonic forms. And likewise, the artist creates works of art that are also at a third remove, just as writing is at a third remove. The work of art is a copy of a thing in the world that is in turn a copy of one of the forms, so it's at a third remove. So the supplement always has to do with the secondary realm of appearance versus authenticity, of appearance versus the idea, the logos being the authentic, and the supplement is associated with the prosthesis, the technical, the unnatural, the inauthentic, that which supplements in a negative way, that which doesn't need supplementing in the first place, to begin with, the metaphysics of presence. So he associates then, so Derrida draws Rousseau characterizing this chain of supplements. We have masturbation, we have mining and metallurgy, we have the wet nurse, we have all of these things that are supplementary to, in the sense that they substitute for the real thing. Notice that American cosmology, by the way, is based precisely on the exact opposite. We prefer the supplement. We prefer in America the artificial thing to the real thing. William Irwin Thompson has written an entire book about this. It's an excellent book. It's called The American Replacement of Nature, which points out and shows how in America we prefer the inauthentic, the fake thing to the real thing. We prefer the supplement, the avatar of the celebrity, to the actual real person. We prefer Cool Whip to whipped cream. We prefer the likes of a Ken Wilber to a real, genuine, authentic European philosopher. Everything in America is a poor substitute for something that is real and authentic. We prefer fast food as opposed to eating and dining in real restaurants and so forth. So the whole cosmology of America is the exact inverse of this classical metaphysics of presence, this logocentric cosmology that Derrida is analyzing in this chapter. So he then moves on to discuss how, with Rousseau, there's a chain of supplements then in Rousseau. Therese, his lover, is a supplement for his mother, substitutes for her. And the supplement then is always a substitute for the real thing, and as such, it leads into Derrida's theory of the supplement as différance. Différance is the same thing. It's basically an endless chain of deferral of signifiers that are constantly deferring to other signifiers ad infinitum, endlessly, and the supplement works in exactly the same way. So the supplement, which does not have, after all, a presence to it, it's a faux presence. There is no real presence to it, since it's opposed to and tries to supplement the actual presence of the self-sufficiency of the metaphysical presence. It doesn't have a reality to it at all. It's not ontologically grounded. And so this becomes basically the play of signification as différance in Derrida's theory of différance here. And notice then that he moves on in this chapter to discuss his theory of reading, in which he makes the famous statement that there is nothing outside the text. So that the text basically functions for him as his cosmology. The text, even though he would reject the word cosmology as metaphysical, nonetheless the way that the text functions in Derrida's world is basically his entire cosmology. Nothing exists outside of it. There are no longer any transcendental signifieds or metaphysical realities for the texts, for the signifiers and signifieds in the text to refer to. So that's all gone, that a whole ontological exterior reality, and consequently the text is everything. And so with différance, we have this intertextuality of an endless deferral of texts within other texts that refer to each other to infinity. Texts are always complex tissues and strata of layers upon layers of other texts. And so we don't have any need in Derrida for the author anymore. The subject is not necessary anymore, since all we have are the text. The text is what is left after the collapse of the Western metaphysical tradition. And note that the way, if you contrast Derrida's use of difference with Deleuze's use of difference, you can see how this works insofar as Deleuze uses difference to refer precisely to his theory of morphogenesis in the outer world. Everything takes place in Deleuze in the exact opposite way. The text doesn't matter for him so much. He builds this entire cosmology out of an ontology of difference, in which forms are produced as novelties and singularities in the exterior world, mostly referring to physical, chemical, and natural and biological forms, whereas différance, as Derrida uses it, as he says, is also a matrix for the production of form, but it's the production of semiotic forms. It's the production of signifiers that différance refers to. So notice there that the ontologies are very different, or the way the two philosophers use the word the fold. Deleuze rather uses the fold to refer to the folding of matter. Matter is always folded up inside, holonomically, other forms of matter. Consciousness is the result of matter that has been folded and folded and folded inwardly until it produces interior consciousness, or is a kind of metaphysical theory that consciousness comes out of, or rather a materialist theory that consciousness comes out of the folded matter. And Derrida, on the other hand, uses the fold to refer to text. In later essays like Dissemination or the Double Session, texts are folded into other texts. He was asked in an interview where he said that Grammatology could have been folded right into the middle of his earlier book, Writing Indifference, or Writing Indifference could have been folded inside of Grammatology. Every time an author cites another author, he is folding that author inside of his text. And so texts are made up out of citations and epigraphs and references to authors and other texts that are constantly folded up inside of text. Texts are text within text within texts, like a set of infinite Chinese boxes. And so he uses fold in a very different way from the way that it's used in Deleuze. And also note too that for Derrida, the metaphysics, his distinction between the metaphysics of presence versus différance as intertextuality is basically his adaptation of Heidegger's distinction between Vorhandenheit and Zuhandenheit. Heidegger had referred to objects in the mode of Vorhandenheit are self-sufficient entities. They're completely self-contained, like the Cartesian cogito that just simply floats, as it were, in Cartesian phase space, or any kind of object that science studies as a transcendental object, a de-worlded object. It's a self-sufficient entity. Atoms in the atomistic theory are all self-sufficient entities. They don't require each other. They're simply self-sufficient. That's Vorhandenheit, the de-worlded self or the de-worlded thing or object, as opposed to Zuhandenheit. Zuhandenheit is when you have a tool that exists in a web of interreferentiality. Let's say the hammer that I'm using or that's just broken can only be understood in the context of a world where its sense and meaning comes from its relation to everything else around it, from the carpenter's shop, the blacksmith's anvil, the nails that the hammer uses. All these other tools create a web of interreferentiality in which the hammer is embedded and which gives it its whole sense and significance. And basically, that's the matrix for Derrida's idea of différance. Différance as intertextuality in which signifiers are embedded in endless webs of other signifiers that constantly refer to each other ad infinitum. Signifiers refer to other signifiers. They're constantly sliding across the surface of the page, as it were, and they don't any longer refer to signifieds. The signifieds have all gone. Not only has the transcendental signified God, being, logos disappeared, but so too have the signifieds that the signifiers, the words themselves, whether graphemes or phonemes, the concepts as signifieds were themselves embedded in metaphysical webs of relationship that gave them meaning. That's all gone, and so all that's left are signifieds that have turned into signifiers that have meaning only through the process of the endless play of signification that is différance, that is the supplement. The supplement is the same thing. It's a kind of metaphysics of absence, even though it isn't a metaphysics at all. The supplement has no presence. It's pure absence, and it's absence through an endless chain of substitutions of signifiers. Just as for Rousseau, his life history in the Confessions is an endless chain of supplements substituting for his mother's love. Everything is a substitute for the mother in Rousseau, or one thing is substituted for another. That's différance, and that is what Derrida brings in to counter the tradition of the metaphysics of presence. So he ends this section with his theory of reading as deferral, text within text within texts, ad infinitum, and we don't any longer even have the subject or the author. The author isn't necessary if the text simply refers to other texts, and every time an author writes, he is himself embedded within a textual tradition, a history that shapes his thinking and that embeds his text inside of other texts. This text, Grammatology, is itself embedded inside of Rousseau's text, just as Rousseau's text is embedded, because of the discussion in here, inside Grammatology. Texts capture other texts and embed them. Every text is a kind of apparatus of semiotic capture that captures another text endlessly. Every epigraph, if you read an epigraph and you look at the beginning, he has epigraphs at the beginning here of every chapter, and the epigraph is itself a text that has been folded up inside of this text, and so forth. So the text is everything for Derrida. It is his cosmology, and it is the alpha and the omega, the A to Z, and there is no longer. This is, I guess, what the Western tradition comes down to as it winds down to its end. All the great fireworks of the metaphysics of God, logos, being, the great cosmospheres and macrospheres of Peter Sloterdijk, the Christian macrospheres, the Heideggerian understanding of being, that's all gone. The grand meta-narratives are dead, and nobody has faith in metaphysics anymore, and so all we have left are texts sliding across and into each other in the contemporary philosophical tradition.